regard. There are many questions with regard to youth unemployment, however. So, Andrea, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. The highest ranked question so far is, how do you predict that the gig economy, Uber, Deliveroo, etc., will affect the job market for young people? If you could start with that one, and also maybe have a go with how better manage the mismatch of the qualifications and the attitudes of youth and labour market needs. So if you have a go at those two questions, I would be grateful.
Of course, here we go. Uber and Deliveroo, these are an example of the platform economy. And everyone is a bit concerned about platform economy. A study came out 2018 predicting a huge influx on it. It was retracted in January of this year, but before it was retracted, it caused quite a stir as people were worried that platform economy was going to pretty much push established employers out of business and take over young people economy, because it seems more accessible to them in the terms of it's difficult to find a full-time job, so let's enter the platform economy. This is true, and it's not that we are recommending young people avoid the platform economy, it's that we are recommending platform economy has to be regulated. Deliveroo and Uber, they provide employment, but they do not provide social security, they don't provide vacation, maternity, or anything that the European Commission would define as a quality job. So a young person, of course, can choose to enter this form of employment, but they are pretty much self-employed. There have been examples in Spain where a person working for a food delivery service was basically full-time employed by them and has sued them for status of full-time employee, which is only fair by European regulation. So in the future, we have to look at young people's rights and protections on the labor market in regards to these services, while of course utilizing them to the fullest because they are quite accessible and make modern life convenient. Then again, the mismatch of qualifications. Here I come back and I stress again, continuous lifelong learning and education methods. If your young persons are not educated for the immediate needs of your regional labor market, you have to sit down at the table with employers and with the service recipients, the persons who need a specific service, sit down, identify the required skills, and then create quick traineeships, create apprenticeships, create on-the-job learning and very quick lifelong learning courses. You can have a qualified workforce within a year with such a training and then occupy the positions. I believe that the idea that young people's attitude is not matching the current labor market might be a bit misled, to be quite honest. I believe that people are quite ready to think that young people don't want to work. It's not true. Young people are not ready to work for 40 to 50 years in the same job, and this is not a bad thing because this will likely not be their career path.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I'm now going to come to Renaud for two questions about the housing project. The ones second and third on the screen there, now first and second on the screen. We know there's an affordability gap, but what do we do about this? How can your conclusions be used by policymakers to actually change something? And have you looked into the impact of sharing economies and touristisation on housing prices? If you could quickly have a go at those two questions, I'd be grateful.
And actually, the two questions go together. For policymakers, housing is typically a multi-scalar issue, and it has to be resolved at several scales and levels of governance together. First level of governance is monetary policy. To go straight to the point, easy access to credit, and an incentive towards debt, and more households' debt fuels housing prices. It's one issue. Another problem is state policies and state policies incentives towards property owners market. Basically, housing and property owners markets have been subsidized throughout the 25 countries of the OECD. And one problem that fuels property prices up and that impacts affordability are state incentives towards ownership. A last issue is a local problem. It's a local problem, and it's how rental market, affordable rental market, affordable owner market, touristic markets are distributed across space. And what you can do about that locally in municipal government. For touristification and, Airbnb, we looked at the data and we compared in Barcelona, in Madrid, in Paris, the impact of Airbnb in terms of how it pressurizes markets locally. Well, it's very local. It's only in the very center of the city. It's very localized in Barcelona, very localized in Paris. It does not clearly impact the issue of affordability in the rest of the functional urban area. So it really has to be connected to how you distribute social housing, rental housing throughout the area, and how you balance things locally. It's not probably an issue to ban rental housing for tourism, for instance. So I tried to answer two questions at the same time.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed. So keeping it concise as well, most welcome. So there's a question to Laura from Tommaso Lecca for the Migrare project. How should cities and regions deal with failed asylum seekers when returning to the country of origin is not possible, for example, because such country doesn't cooperate? What should cities and regions do? You can see that one highlighted now at the top on the screen. That's off, I think.
Now?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. I was saying that this is quite of a relevant question, and the scope of the study didn't look into irregular migrant, but I think there is a lot of space for further research in these. And the project clearly highlights that this is an issue that can somehow bring some clashes between a level of governance, because while several aspects related to the legal challenges are dealt at national level, then the practicalities of facing this challenge are at regional, local level. Therefore, I think the very first point is that there is at times a legal and legislative vacuum in certain situations that are created also by some changing attitudes. For example, the case, without getting political, but in the case of Italy, the most recent reform with the security degree with the current government is creating, as I was saying, a vacuum, a legal vacuum. What local level can do in this context is definitely activating non-governmental organizations that are mobilizing themselves to somehow shelter those that are left in this gray zone. But definitely there is need for local institutions, local actors to lobbying, be more at national level to somehow fill this legal vacuum.
Okay, excellent. I've got two quick questions for the other panelists. So to Jason, I'm not sure we've got that on the screen, but for the question is, have you investigated the effectiveness of public service obligations in transport provision? No. Mute button at the top. Yeah.
Is this one working? Oh, there
Yeah.
we go. So I've been watching all these sort of questions popping up in Slido, and there's some really good ones about Eric, I must say. So if anyone wants to pop up to me at the end and have a chat, I'm more than happy to do so. In this particular instance, the issue of public transport was a major component of what we were working on the project. It's somewhat complex. In the first instance, these areas are typically very dispersed in terms of population, and in fact the best solution in quite a lot of instances is private car. So persuading individuals to switch to public transport is even more challenging. The other problem, of course, is that public transport was frequently poorly organized, I think it's fair to say, where you might only have one service in the day, and persuading people to engage with that, if you miss this bus, then you're going to be here overnight, was extremely difficult. The other point is that historically they've seen fluctuations in terms of the provision itself, the quality of it, the quantity of it, and so forth. And once bitten, twice shy seemed to be the attitude in terms of public transport. What we really focused on was mixing modes and mixing passenger services. So we were suggesting the expansion of voluntary community services with the support of local municipal authorities that are tailored to the needs of small communities in particularly remote areas. We also focused on improving access to, say, for example, if a school bus was passing through a district, why shouldn't it also take on board elderly passengers, or why shouldn't it take on board somebody who wants to commute to the same place in terms of work? So public transport is notoriously difficult in terms of improving the culture surrounding it, but what we wanted to try and do was both raise the profile of that, stress to policymakers the needs to stabilise and ensure a consistent supply over time, but also look for alternatives that could intersect with that and improve the offering in terms of transport to get people from cars into other alternative means of transport.
Right, excellent. And then a final question, quickly, if you can, to Helke. Big data mobility, you're mapping where people are going, but how do you use this to predict where people will go? Or are you just using current flows to help work out where bottlenecks are?
Thank you. As I'm the least technical person of our research team, I will provide you a short answer, and you can have a look at our report that's coming up soon. But basically, yes, these kinds of new data sets like mobile positioning data or automatic traffic measurement data that we also had a look at in the project can be used as a basis for building these kind of predictive models, but that's a topic for further research, definitely not possible in this kind of short project, and also detecting bottlenecks and thinking about how can like different interventions, how do they affect mobility patterns and so on. So,
okay,
yes.
Excellent. Okay, good. Thank you very much indeed. So thank you. Give a warm round of applause to these panelists. Thank you, all of you.